Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. If you've been glancing at the news lately, you've probably seen those flashing, bright red headlines about a deadly virus on a cruise ship. Now, it's so easy to see that and instantly feel your heart rate spike, right? I mean, we've all been through the ringer these past few years when it comes to global health, but today we're taking a deep breath. We're going to look past all that sensationalism and just focus on the facts. We're going to map out exactly what is happening, what the science is actually telling us, and what this situation reveals about our broader public health systems. Let's get into it.
All right, our story really kicks off with the number 18. As of mid-May, 18 Americans are actively being monitored for hantavirus. And look, whenever we hear about health officials actively monitoring a group of citizens for a severe viral pathogen, well, that naturally commands our immediate attention.
So where's this coming from? This monitoring all stems from one highly specific isolated incident. At least 11 cases of the virus popped up aboard a single cruise ship. Now, just think about the environment of a cruise ship for a second. It's essentially this massive floating petri dish, right? A totally closed-off, interconnected system. When a bug gets loose in that kind of setting, public health officials have to move at lightning speed to track exactly who might have been exposed and how the virus is moving through the population on board.
And very tragically, this outbreak has already resulted in 3 confirmed deaths. That is an incredibly sobering statistic. It definitely raises some immediate alarm bells. Because when a virus is severe enough to cause multiple fatalities in a localized setting like this, it is absolutely critical that we figure out exactly what we're dealing with.
Part 1. Cruise Ship Outbreak. Tracing the Origins.
Okay, so how did this whole thing actually happen? The timeline here is honestly a perfect example of just how interconnected our world really is. It started with something literally as mundane as birdwatching. A Dutch couple was on a relaxing birdwatching excursion, but during that idyllic trip, they unknowingly crossed paths with a specific species of rat that was carrying the virus. This exposure happened before they even stepped foot on the cruise. So the ship leaves Argentina, carrying these unknowingly infected passengers, and eventually winds up spending weeks isolated off the coast of Africa. Just wild to think about. A quiet afternoon looking at birds can quickly snowball into a multi-continent health incident.
Part 2. Understanding hantavirus, the Andes strain.
Now, before anyone hits the panic button and starts bracing for another pandemic, let's look at the actual science, because here is the key to why this specific outbreak is getting so much international attention. Usually, hantavirus does not spread from person to person. Normally, you only catch it through direct contact with infected rodents or, their droppings. But this outbreak is a little bit different. It involves what is known as the Andes strain. And this specific strain, unlike the usual ones we see, actually has a limited ability to spread from human to human. That one little scientific distinction right there, that's exactly what elevated this from a standard wildlife issue into a massive outbreak on a cruise ship.
I know. The absolute second you hear the words person-to-person spread, your brain instantly jumps straight back to COVID-19. But we need to pause here. The chief hospital epidemiologist at the University of Florida points out a huge and honestly a very relieving distinction. Even this Andes strain cannot transmit easily from person to person the way COVID did. We are not talking about a highly contagious respiratory bug that just sweeps through a crowded room in minutes. The mechanics of transmission here are vastly different, and the transmissibility is significantly lower.
And because of that lower transmissibility, the bottom line is actually pretty reassuring. Hantavirus isn't some brand new mystery illness. The medical community has a really solid understanding of how it works, and more importantly, they know exactly how to control the infections. Because we already have this established playbook, experts really aren't expecting a massive surge in cases, especially with the strict containment measures they've already got rolling for those 18 Americans.
Part 3. Disjointed U.S. response. Policy and infrastructure.
So, if the epidemiologists aren't actually losing sleep over the virus itself, what is the real problem? Well, the core concern is actually how the United States responded to it. A Georgetown health policy professor hit the nail on the head, bluntly pointing out that the CDC's response here has been disjointed and late. And context is everything, right? This professor is comparing what's happening right now sharply with the CDC's historical track record. Think back to the Ebola and Zika outbreaks. During those crises, the CDC was widely recognized as the absolute global gold standard for outbreak response. So seeing this stark contrast between that past leadership and today's disjointed reaction, that is exactly why public health experts are sounding the alarm.
Part 4. Policy shifts. Structural changes. Look, massive institutions don't just change overnight. They shift because of concrete policy decisions made over time. When trying to understand how we got here, policy experts point to a specific timeline of structural adjustments under the Trump administration. First, right at the start of 2025, there was a 10% cut to the CDC's staff. That's a huge chunk of personnel. Then, a year later, at the start of 2026, the United States officially completed its withdrawal from the World Health Organization. Fast forward to right now, and the CDC is currently operating without clear leadership. In partially looking at this timeline of structural and personnel shifts within our primary health institutions, policy experts argue that these are the exact puzzle pieces directly contributing to the late and disjointed response we are seeing today.
Part 5. The True Future Threat. Assessing Readiness.
At the end of the day, this explainer isn't just about a localized hantavirus outbreak on a boat. It really acts as a stress test for our entire public health infrastructure. Health experts universally agree that this specific virus isn't a pandemic-level threat. But seeing how disjointed the response was, that leaves us staring down one incredibly urgent question. If our institutions are stumbling right now to coordinate a swift response to a known virus with low transmissibility, is the United States structurally equipped to handle the inevitable arrival of a disease that spreads far, far faster? It's a massive question about our readiness, our infrastructure, and taking the lessons from this localized outbreak seriously before the next true global threat hits. Are we actually ready? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I'll see you next time.